Hello, welcome back to the channel. This is our second video on the Terraform. In this video, we are going to learn about Terraform dynamic block, why and when to use them, and why it is important to understand the dynamic blocks in Terraform if you want to become a good programmer. Hi, my name is Rakesh Suryavanshi and you are watching Be a Learner. Before we discuss about the dynamic blocks in Terraform, let's first of all understand what is attributes block. For this, I am going to take an example of Azure Virtual Network resource type. Here in the Terraform docs site, this is the virtual network example given. In this example, you can see that virtual network has certain number of attributes which are mandatory, which you need to pass on, and then there are some attributes which are defined like this: the name of the attribute followed by the curly braces. These are the type of resource which are called the attribute block. Right? This attribute block could have one or many attributes inside it, and again this can have another child attribute block as well. So you could have an attribute block inside the attribute block. You can have another attribute block, things like that. Now, this attribute block can be mandatory or it can be optional. For example, in this case, DDoS protection, enabling the or specifying the DDoS protection into your virtual network is optional. Similarly, you could create a virtual network without any subnets, so subnet block is also optional. And it is also possible that in the virtual network you might want to create more than one subnet. Like here in this example, we have created 3 different subnet, or it might possibly you would like to create 5 or 10 different subnet or just one subnet. So this block will also always create a virtual network with a DDoS protection and with 3 different subnet. So if I have requirement to create 4 different subnet, then I need to modify the code, and obviously that particular resource block cannot be used elsewhere. Otherwise, everywhere wherever this resource block is going to be used, it will be basically creating the same specification, right? Now, how do you make this generic so that based on your on-demand request, your resource block should create the specified number of resources, let's say 1 or many resources. For example, in this case, virtual network should be capable to create 1 subnet or many subnet, or maybe none of the subnets in our case. So how do we do that? To achieve this goal, we use the dynamic block. How do we use that? Let's look into the demonstration. I'll copy this code. I'll use it in my demonstration which we have created in our previous video. So now if I use this block as is, if I run the Terraform apply command, so let me change some of the variables like this. I don't want the DDoS protection, it's very expensive. Also, I don't want any security group for now in any of my subnet. I would like to use the same tags as my resource group has, so I'll use my tag variable. Now, using this code block, I would be able to create a virtual network which has the addresses with this and which has 3 subnet. So let's run the Terraform apply command. So my resource group is created successfully, as you can see the status here. But as I said, it has created a resource group with 3 different subnets. So now anytime I'm going to create or call this particular code block, it's going to create a virtual network with 3 different subnet. That's not good code. So how do we use the dynamic here? To use the dynamic, you need to use keyword dynamic, and then after that, which attribute type you want to use it as a dynamic, you need to specify that in a double quote. After that, or it is specified as in double quote followed by opening bracket like this, and then you need to specify the condition. So let's say I would like to run for each here. For each how many times? Let's say for each var dot subnets. So this is going to be my subnet type variable which I'll be creating, and then followed by you need to have the content, which is again the keyword, and then opening bracket and closing bracket, put a new line, and then specify the attribute values for your dynamic block, which in this case the name and the address like this. And obviously the name I'll be reading it from my variable, so I can now you can't use subnet var dot subnet or subnets dot something like, let's say, name. You can't do that. You should do this thing, dynamic attribute name. You should always use attribute name then dash value. So like in normal for each loop you use for each dot value, so instead of each dot value you should use the attribute which you are making it dynamic. So this name, in this case subnet, so subnet dot value, and then obviously it's going to be the name property. Similarly, subnet dot attribute is going to be address prefix. So let's say I will say address, for example. This is what I'm going to create. For now, let's comment this out or just remove this from here, because this is something which we are going to pass it from the variables. So I'll go to my variable file. I'll create a variable called the subnet or subnets. I'll just remove the type. I don't want this type to be created for now. I'll create a default value. Let's put the values in the Terraform variable file. This is my variable created, declared, and now I'm going to pass the value of my subnets here. So what was the name of my variable? Which is name of the variable is subnets equals to like this. I can specify the values like this. I'm basically declaring the string type. I'm declaring the collection type of variable. So this is how you can declare the variable. So this is my subnet is a type of collection. And which type of collection? The collection has two properties, name and address prefix. Or I guess we have given the name value as an address instead of address prefix. So let's make it address prefix, or instead of address prefix, let's make it address. So let's run the plan now. Terraform plan. Let's see if it works. As you can see, it shows that no infrastructure changes because we have used the same set of subnets. So now even though, let's say, if I need to create another subnet, I can create another subnet as is, let's say subnet 4, and I'll specify, I'm just making the changes to the parameters, and you can see that I haven't made any changes here. So my code is as is. This time it should say it's going to create another subnet, because 3 subnet we already have. We have just appended our variable to another subnet. Now let's say we want to create a virtual network, but we don't want to create this subnet. So what we can do is we can basically remove this block and put the value as an empty array. So now if I run the plan, basically, so it will try to destroy the subnet, because we are saying now. So now the Terraform code is deciding how many subnets to create based on the variable block which we have passed. So in this case, we have passed the variable with 4 subnets. That's the reason it is trying to create a virtual network with 4 subnets. Let's say if we don't want to create any subnets, I can simply just pass the empty block like this. And if I run the Terraform plan now, it will show just creating a virtual network without a subnet. And this is how it looks like. Virtual network, just the address space and no subnets. Okay. I hope it is clear how to use the dynamic block in case of you want to one or many resources. Now let's take a scenario wherein you would like to create only one resource if a particular variable is true or false. So let's see how do we do that. For this, I'm going to take an example of the storage account. So this is the storage account resource type which you can use to create the storage account in Azure. And here in this case, if you scroll down to the documentation, you'll find the identity block, which is to create the identity of type managed or system identity or the user manager identity. So let's see how do we create the managed identity based on the parameters which you pass. So let me copy the storage account block code. Now here, as I said, we would like to create the managed identity in this storage account. So here in the documentation says that a managed identity block defined below. When you see this kind of a description in Terraform documentation, a identity or a particular resource attribute, it means you can only specify a single instance or single occurrence of that particular resource type. You can't have multiple occurrences of that resource type, right? You can't have two managed identity type declared in your Terraform code for a storage account. But let's say in case of virtual network, you can have one or more subnets within the virtual network. So it could be more than one attributes can be declared, right? So be careful while you are reading this documentation side, because here you will get an idea of what is or how many attributes you can declare by having this detailed definition of that attribute. So let's create an identity. Again, I can define the identities like type as in system. That's it. It will create a managed identity in this storage account, which is of type system. Now, if I do it like this, it will create the managed identity always without basically having a need of it or not. So I don't have any decision making system. To make it optional, because we know that the identity is optional, you can create a storage account without the managed identity. But if you want to write a storage account block where you have the option to create an identity and you have option to not to create an identity with the storage account, so to do that you can use the dynamic, and then again this attribute I need to use identity, and then here I'm going to use for each. Again, this time we are going to define where enable manage, or I would say system managed identity. If this is equals to true, I would say run this block one time. If not, then just ignore this block. So now what will happen? It will say, okay, content should read the content, and I would say just run it, leave it as is. Now obviously I need to declare this variable, so I'm going to declare this variable like this, and it is type of boolean. I can define this as a default value as false. So now if I'm going to run this code as is, wherein considering, remember this value of this attribute is false, so it's not, this condition is not going to true. So it will, this is the conditional operator, so it will not go inside this block, it will go inside this block, and ideally it should not create a storage account without having any need of the, without having the managed identity. How to approve? This time I'm just running the Terraform as is. So it has created a storage account, and Now if I change the, the variable value from default false to, let's say, default true, and if I run it now, Terraform plan, let's see how the plan looks like. As you can see that Terraform code is trying to create or enable the manage identity into the story account, because we have set the variable value as a true and this condition is matching, and it's trying to create the enable the identity. Similarly, you can have another variables created like enable user manage identity. If you like to, let's say, make a decision, if this variable is true, then enable the system manage identity. If the user manage identity flag is true, then enable this identity to the storage account. So you want to have this kind of a dynamic code, then you can do that using the dynamic block, which will execute at exactly one time. So we have seen both the example where we have the dynamic block which can run on a collection and can create one or more resource type or configure one or more child resources within the resource type, in this case subnets of a virtual network. And we have also seen the example of running a dynamic block exactly one time based on a particular condition. I hope this is helpful to understand when to use these dynamic blocks in your Terraform infrastructure as code example. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching the channel. See you in the next video.